Chris on again today because obviously the portal was open today, this week, sorry, to do with the job retention scheme. So I imagine you guys have got some questions you want to ask Chris. Chris can probably shed some more light on the situation as well. So I'll hand over to Chris and he can go from there.
So what happened is that the government released their 5th update on the COVID-19 job retention scheme on Sunday, and that was 48 hours after version 4. So this is sort of really fast moving. Now, Sage told us that they would release the software for this on Monday, and then they said they've had problems because the government have changed the rules, so they changed it on Wednesday. But then what the government are doing is, I don't know if you've noticed, but if in Poland and Denmark, they're saying things like, if we give you state handouts, then we want to make sure, you pay tax in this country. So an example is, say, someone like Starbucks that's in the UK, Starbucks takes most of the profits out through Holland. And so the government, I think, are bringing similar things. So what we've noticed is some of our children's nurseries, what they're saying is that we want the children's nurseries to stay open. If you close, then you can't claim the amount under the furlough scheme you're going to claim. And things like this have slowed down the software changes because they've put in more wrinkles. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more of that, because the government's saying, look, if we're going to pay basically all your staff salaries, you better do these other things as well. So there may be some more of that coming through. But the good news is Sage released the software at 8 o'clock this morning. And the main things about the changes that have happened is that since Friday, they've explained more details on the job retention scheme. So what you may be aware of is that this month, being the first month of the tax year, a lot of employers can claim something called the employment allowance. Now, the employment allowance is a maximum of £4,000 if you're eligible. And what that means is that you don't pay employers national insurance up to £4,000. So the knock-on effect of that means that if you put in a furlough claim for April onwards, you can't claim the employer's NI on the furlough pay until the £4,000 has been fully utilised. So that's sort of one of the wrinkles that they brought in that you just got to be aware of. The other thing is the government say that they can accommodate 450,000 claims an hour in their scheme, and they think that they're going to be paying the bulk of the money within 6 working days. So the idea then is that once you've got your claim in and you can put in a claim for obviously March and April now, then hopefully you'll get that money back within 6 days. The problem is, what a lot of people have found is there's a lot of information you have to put in manually for each employee. So if you've got less than 100 employees, above 100 you can use a CSV file. But if not, individually for each employee, you have to put things like the PAYE reference number, their full name, their national insurance number, the start of the claim period, the end of the claim period, the bank details, the self-assessment details of the company. So it could be quite, if you haven't got software, it could be quite a detailed process and quite time consuming. But if you've got software, obviously it'll be a lot easier to do that. The government have actually released furlough calculators. So what you need to bear in mind that if your accounts end, so let me give you an example. If you're a self-employed person and your accounts end the 31st of March and you've got employees, then if you make a claim for March, then that means for you personally as self-employed, then that claim is taxable income in your accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020. And also if you make a furlough claim for March, then that furlough claim is taxable income in the accounts. So you need to make sure that you record these if your year end is March. Going forwards, you'll then have to record any other month that you make a claim for. So at the moment, the self-employed claim can only go up to the end of May, so that you can claim it for 3 months, March, April, May. The furlough scheme, they've extended it till the end of June. And I wouldn't be surprised if the self-employed scheme, they extend by another month, because they are sort of mirror imaging each other, both for £2,500, 80%, etc. So broadly speaking, they are very similar. So I wouldn't be surprised if that gets extended. But just remember, you need to include that income in your accounts as taxable income. And the government have already said that the furlough scheme, they're going to pay the money out really quickly, which means they're not going to have time to vet everything. So they will subsequently check for fraudulent claims, because undoubtedly some people will be tempted to make claims for people who are working for them, who they're making a claim for. Now, one of the points about the furlough scheme is you can't claim for any members of staff if they are working. They can't do any work for the business. So you just want to make sure that you keep your notes on that, so it's clarifying what you're doing. And you can furlough some directors, and it's important that you have directors meeting minutes just to record who is being furloughed. And also those directors can only do statutory duties. So statutory duties are dictated by the Companies Act 2006, and it's things like filing the accounts, but they can't do any sales work, anything that generates income for the company. So that's really important that that is separated as well. But the other thing to bear in mind, that if you are self-employed, I've mentioned this in the last 2 financial reviews I've done. If you are self-employed, the government say they're going to contact you towards the middle or end of next month, May, to pay you the money in June. The trouble with that is that means it's wide open to fraudsters potentially contacting you, saying they're from the Inland Revenue, and say, give me your bank details, and then all manner of problems could happen. So you just got to be really careful for this, because we just think we see scams already coming through, and there's great scope for a lot more to happen. So that sort of gives you an idea. And just one final point, if you go on the time to pay, the Inland Revenue time to pay, that means that you can, if you haven't got, say you can't pay your PAYE on time, you can go in and ring the time to pay Department of HM Revenue and Customs, but they've changed their phone number. So they've changed it to a new COVID phone number, which is 0800 024 1222. So you just want to make sure you get the right phone number. But if you've got a problem paying corporation tax, PAYE, anything like that, ring them up and make sure you arrange it in advance so that you've got notice, so you can pay it at a later stage. The VAT, they've already told you that any VAT payments that fall due between the 21st of March and the 30th of June can be delayed, and they can be paid on or before 31st of March next year. And your personal tax that's due on the 31st of July, that also can be delayed. In both of those instances, VAT and personal tax, you don't need to make a claim, it's automatically done. With the instance with VAT, you just need to file your VAT return. With personal tax, you just don't pay it, and you'll pay it on the 31st of January. So a lot of that, some of that is a recap, some of them is the releases that the government gave on Friday, but it's such a moving feast with this stuff. You've got to continually check, because the legislation is changing on a sort of virtually a daily basis at the moment. But that's sort of a summary of where we are. I hope that's of help.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Did anyone have any questions for Chris to do with the job retention, or do you think he's covered it all?
Can I just ask a question about the information that you put in for the end of claim period? And this might be obvious once you go onto the scheme, but we haven't yet got the information to input, so I haven't been on properly. Our staff have been furloughed until the end of June, but clearly we're only seeking payment. Well, we've only furloughed from the beginning of April, so only seeking payment for this month. Is the end of claim period therefore the period of pay, so for us, April, or is it the length of the furlough, in which case the end of June? And if it is the latter, what happens if you end up having to bring some or all people back early?
Well, you can only make a claim on a monthly basis. They're only going to pay you. So, and the reason is for exactly what you said, because what you can do, what some firms have said is that we're going to furlough someone for April, and now we've got some work coming. So then what happens, you can take them off furlough, and as long as the furlough period is a minimum 3 weeks, you can take them off, they can do the work, then you can put them back on furlough. So what that means is the way the pay slip is supposed to be done, and to be honest, we haven't done any yet because the software only came in at 8 o'clock this morning. But the idea is on your pay slip, you need to separate normal pay from furlough pay. and then that should enable your software to work out the calculation. So the calculation, I had a client that contacted me last week and said, we just realised that we're not going to have enough furlough pay. Can we increase our salaries to get more furlough pay? Well, it doesn't work like that, because the furlough pay is based on your average of your last 12 months or what you earned the same month last year. So the government obviously would be open to a lot of fraud if you're allowed to do that. So in the release that I gave, I think on the 26th of March, it explains all the criteria that you need to follow to get the furlough pay. But the short answer to your question is, I think you notify them how long you want someone to be furloughed for, but that's not set in stone, because you can only make a claim each month as you go along, for the very reason that you said.
Thank you. Thanks.
Chris, I've got a question for Chris. Is car allowance included with basic salary if it's a contractual arrangement?
No.
Is that a no?
Yeah, because I think what happens is they said that it's going to be, all it is contractual pay. So in the last release I gave, what happens is that if for sake of argument you have a member of staff and you say your salary is X and you're contracted to do 8 hours overtime a month, then that's contractual liability. If they actually do 20 hours overtime a month, then the additional hours aren't treated as contractual liability, so aren't included. But the salary is the only element that the revenue treat, not benefits in kind. So a car is treated as a P11D benefit in kind, and that's not included in their calculations for furlough pay.
What about the car allowance, Chris? You know, our contract says you'll get a basic salary of X and you'll get a car allowance of X.
Okay. And does that take them above the £2,500 a month, 80%? Anyway.
Possibly, yeah, possibly. But I'm just wondering whether, because it's a contractual, it's a contractual payment.
If it's not a benefit in kind, you're saying basically that's just salary, isn't it?
Effectively, it's just itemised separately, and it's in the contract set separately, but it's a guaranteed payment that they rely upon every month.
As long as it's not a benefit in kind and it is contractual, then I think it is included. But I think what you're saying is your salary is, so you could have said your salary isn't, £2,500 plus £1,000 for the use of a car. It's £3,500 a month. I think that comes back to the same thing.
Right.
But you'll probably find that's above the allowance of 2,500 anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Anyone else have any more questions?
Chris, sorry, just based on what you said then about overtime, can I just clarify? We're a criminal defence firm, and so our solicitors work overtime in that they have to go to the police stations out of hours, 1, 2 in the morning, whatever, do interviews, and they get paid overtime. Their contracts say that they are required to work unsocial hours to cover that, but the contracts don't specify a minimum of hours because it depends on how busy the police stations are and when the calls are made. Are there overtime claims then? Can we include those in the furlough payments? For one person, it doesn't matter because it goes over the 2,500. His salary goes over the 2,500. But for the majority of others, they're all under the 2,500. So if it can be claimed for, it would make a difference.
Yeah, I think the problem is that what happens is the revenue are concerned about possible fraudulent claims, and I'm not saying yours are fraudulent, but if it's non-contractual, the problem they've got is everyone could say, well, Frank normally does 20 hours overtime, and it will be difficult to sort of check all that lot. So I think the answer is it will only come back to a contractual liability. Anything that fluctuates over and above that, and this is what I put in one of the email of the financial review of 26th of March. Basically what happens is that anything that fluctuates non-contractual doesn't come under the furlough scheme.
But I think that's the question. Is the contract says that they are required to work unsocial hours? to facilitate the police station attendance, but it doesn't go on to specify the number of hours they're required to work. So does that mean it is a contractual term, or it isn't because it doesn't specify the number of hours?
The latter, because it doesn't specify any set hours. So what I said before is if the contract says you must work 8 hours additional a month, then that's a contractual liability. If it's an unspecified hours, then presumably if there's no work, they would do no extra hours. And if there is work, they would. So A, it fluctuates, and B, it's non-contractual because they have an obligation to do it, but the figure isn't fixed of how many hours they do.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask, sorry, now every time you speak, go on, after you.
Carry on.
This is more just just canvass an opinion, really. There's been a little bit of a talk more recently about relaxing the sort of the lockdown, not so much coming out of the government, but generally kind of a bit of pressure being applied. And in the papers last weekend there was mention of this traffic light system, which might be a sort of a gradual easing of the restrictions. And yet in the first month that furlough, that this job retention scheme got announced, it was only announced at the beginning of April, albeit it was backdated to the 1st of March, but in the very first month that it was ever first announced and the scheme put in place until the end of May, in that month, it's now been extended to the end of June. And I kind of wonder what people's thoughts are on the message that sends out. Are they kind of saying it's likely that we're going to be needing to be at home longer than perhaps?
So if I give you an example of one of my clients that does music recordings, so they say they record at things like the Barbican. So what they're saying there is that, say, a theatre, the same could be in the theatre or something. So what they're saying is if lockdown stopped today, then you'd have to work out the availability of, say, an orchestra to attend the Barbican. Then you'd have to book them in. Then you'd have to advertise it. So the chances are, if lockdown stopped today, they wouldn't have orchestras at the Barbican that would be advertised and booked for and people attending until, say, October. In which case, just because it stopped today doesn't mean my client will get income from tomorrow. And they're saying it would take time for the economy to pick up. And I'd be very surprised if it could even pick up in 1 month, because there's so much of these things. Some of these venues you have to book up for months in advance. And my client had all these music venues and theatres already booked up. Well, they've all been cancelled, so they'll all have to be rescheduled at some stage. But then the problem is everyone wants to reschedule it. So his income stream could be put off till next year.
Okay.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, Jared?
Yeah, it was a curiosity, really. Yeah, but that's a good point. I think there's a lot of businesses going to be in that position. When things get lifted, there's going to be some time needed to get things up and running again, which was always a little bit of a bit of confusion, really, or uncertainty that I had over why the government wants people who are on furlough to completely and utterly sit on their hands, where the alternative of kind of keeping in touch, with customers, albeit maybe not sort of generating income and revenue, but by keeping in touch with customers during the period of furlough will surely help a company start to generate and bounce back quicker, which would then be a benefit for all, including the government's economy as well.
I agree, but I mean, I give you an example of another client who's a builder. They're all happy to work on site and can work on site. They can social distance, but they can't get the materials because all the building firms are closed down. So unless you've actually got the whole chain working, it stops. So your particular part of work may be able to continue, but if the rest of it doesn't, the suppliers and everyone else can't work around you, then you're not going to actually get the product out the door. I mean, I had one client who rang me and basically he makes, for want of a better word, carriage clocks. And he said, Chris, I've got a factory It probably takes 10 items in my carriage clock. I've bought and paid for 9 of them. I've had the labour to bill everything, but until I get the 10th item, I can't sell any of them. And they're all sitting there, 90% completed in my warehouse. I've paid for everything, but they just can't go out the door. So you've got to get the whole 100% of your item out, and that's the trouble.
It's yeah, I get it. I get it. You know, most of my lot are on furlough now, and you know, we recruit to the construction industry actually, and there's nothing going on. No companies are recruiting. You know, most of our clients have put a proportion of their people on furlough, and they won't be looking at external recruitment before they've redeployed those people back into jobs. So it's going to be a long time. You know. But it would still have been useful, you know, it is what it is, I guess, but it would have still have been useful for my team to have still been able to be in contact and keeping a line of communication going with their, you know, the candidates in the market, so that in 2 months' time, when things do pick up, you know, we wouldn't be starting from scratch, I suppose, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, we've been approached by some recruitment firms, but the problem I've got is, it's more difficult to interview them over Zoom or something. I'm not saying it's impossible. Even if we liked them and we gave them a job, we can't even induct them because we can't get anyone to train them in the office to actually get going on the stuff. And without inducting someone, they can't do the work. So we're sort of stopped quite quickly from actually sort of moving that forwards.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, everyone, today. I think Chris has answered all your questions.